I'm going to be asking specific questions about. So we're going to start out talking a little bit about Catalyst 2030. For those of you who don't know what Catalyst 2030 is, it's an amazing group that has come together as a part of a big initiative. Anton, did you want to do the talking about Catalyst?
No, go on. I'm already taking the notes, so it would be perfect if you, Karen, would continue.
Sure, absolutely. So we've come together, a lot of the intermediary groups that many of you are a part of, Ashoka, the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship, the Skull Foundation, and Echoing Green, as a result of the provocation of Jeru Boria, who a lot of you are familiar with, who is a member of a lot of those organizations and an incredible starter catalyzing this movement forward. The point of the organization, the reason it was founded, is that the SDGs are not going to be achieved, according to the latest calculations, until 2094. And of course, again, given the COVID reality, that probably is pushed even further. Lack of resources, minimal coordination, and disconnected funding between funding models and needs seem to have been identified as some of the major issues that are causing much of the problem. Catalyst is an inclusive network initiated by leading social entrepreneurs, and we hope that you will all consider joining the movement if you have not already. It's a very inclusive network, and we really want to have voices from all over the community join us so that we can make this as well-rounded and well thought out movement from all different perspectives as possible. So in the chat, there will be more information about joining Catalyst 2030 for those of you who have not already done so. Our mission is to catalyze collaboration across sectors to unleash the collaborative potential for global systems change, and our vision is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 by mobilizing social entrepreneurs, partners, and resources. Who we are, over 150 social entrepreneurs, and so much work being done. So many of the organizations that have joined have incredible track records. So for further information on Catalyst 2030, I would encourage you to go to the website and peruse around a little bit. It's been an exciting journey for those of us who've been a part of it from the beginning, and we really hope that you'll join us. This campaign is about discussions, and we are looking at sharing how social innovators are responding to COVID-19, forming collaborative partnerships, co-creating policy recommendations, and initiating dialogue, sharing solutions. So what we're hoping to do today, all of the information and all of your feedback and inputs from this conversation today is going to be condensed into a document, and it'll go into all of the different pieces that we're going to be putting together as part of a policy document. For those of you who haven't been part of the Catalyst 2030 movement yet, it is really an extraordinary opportunity in terms of co-creation. We hear the word bantered about a lot, but it's been really quite exciting to be part of watching actual real co-creation in action. And for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to read the Embracing Complexity report, which was the first big publication that we did collaboratively, we'll post that as well in the chat. It's also available on the Catalyst 2030 website, which genuinely did feature input from over 150 social entrepreneurs, intermediaries, funders, and other groups in the space. So it was a very exciting process. These are the different sessions that we've got. This is the campaign and how it will roll out. Again, this information is available on the Catalyst 2030 website for a deeper dive into this. But the part that you need to know now is that this conversation is actually producing something at the end, and that your feedback and your insights will be incorporated into this policy document, which is, I think, the most important takeaway. This is a roundtable discussion, and then let's get to today, what we're talking about, systems change, which is my favorite part of this whole thing. And I couldn't be more excited to have the panelists that we have with us participating. I'm a big fan of all of their work and have had the opportunity to work closer with some of them. François Bonici is the director of the Schwab Foundation, which is the sister organization at the World Economic Forum, focusing on social entrepreneurship. Odin is a partner at Ashoka Germany and the lead of the systems unit at Ashoka Globalizer. And I have had the joy of working with Odin as I'm an Ashoka fellow and was lucky enough to get to go through the Globalizer process, which was incredible. I used to call him Boy Genius, which I don't think he really liked, but a lot of us call him that, which he is. And then Seema Patel, who is Chief Executive Officer at the Global Knowledge Initiative. And Seema comes from a long career at many different organizations, but most notably to our conversation, I think the most important piece is USAID, which is of course one of the bigger funders that we would be looking to engage as the social entrepreneurship community. Now, all of these amazing panelists have, we could take the entire 90 minutes to discuss the incredible works that they have done. I encourage you to go look at their bios and their respective websites. It's really interesting to see how all these experiences come together and lead people on these journeys. Which is where I would actually like to start our session. So we are here to talk about systems change. And it's something that everyone on this call is really passionate about. So I thought it might be interesting actually to start the conversation by asking each of our panelists how they got to systems change, which is something that I always ask everyone in this space who I talk to, and everyone's answer is always so interesting. So I'd love to hear, maybe François, we could start with you. Yes, okay. I'm being asked, we were supposed to start with actually finding out who's in the room here. So maybe if you can answer this, the poll, so we can see who's in the room. Whether you're a social entrepreneur, funder, academic, or other would be great to hear, so we can just have a sense. Okay, we've got, we're getting there on everybody answering. 80%. Who hasn't answered the poll? Intermediary is okay. Perfect. Okay, a lot of social entrepreneurs, intermediaries, no funders, so we'll have to give them the paper. Academics, great, perfect. Thank you, Anton, thank you for that. Here, we'll share the results. There we go. Okay, so that's who we have in the room. A lot of social entrepreneurs, my fave. So I'd love to get back to our question on the journey, because I think that's always such an interesting one. A lot of times people don't really understand what you're talking about when you talk about systems change. And so I thought it might be interesting to ask our panelists how they got here. What was the experience that they had that really made them understand that this really was the way forward? François, can we start with you?
Sure. Thank you so much, Karen, and thanks to Anton and everyone on the call. I think when you asked the question, got to systems change, I very much feel like I and probably most people feel like we're still at the beginning of the journey. And I'm sure many would agree that this is a word we've been using for the last couple of years to describe, I think, a different way of approaching the work of social change. And I think some people have more specific definitions about it, and I think we're all, and people mean very different things, as you say. So I'll talk about my journey and where that came from, and that's been both as a practitioner, as a medical doctor, and working in systems, as a professional in the field of social entrepreneurship, and as a semi-academic working in the academic field for the last 10 years, and still trying to finish a book on systems work. So in all those guises, I think the most important one is the personal one. I think our whole industry of social change comes out of a 20th century industrial mindset, where we have linear approaches to solving problems. The scientific kind of revolution of the last couple of centuries made immense progress. And personally, as a doctor, I was 23 years old and ended up working in Namibia, running the main hospital of a country which had essentially 20 young doctors between the ages of 23, 25 running this hospital, and recognized that I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to fix things, I'm going to save people's lives with the tools that I had was clearly a fallacy. It was such a life-transforming year for me. I need to speak up a bit. Is that a bit better? Perhaps it's the headphones. Okay, I've had a comment to speak up. The journey was essentially one of recognizing the individual, is clearly a single individual approach cannot solve the immense challenges that I found as a young doctor, and the clear social determinants of what I was seeing from the healthcare perspective of actually what led to the issues that were coming about. But also growing up in a country like South Africa that has this deep, long history of entrenched, systemic, institutionalized racism, prejudice, bias, inequality, and years of activism to try and overcome that. When later in my life I had set up a Center for Social Innovation and Social Entrepreneurship, quite quickly realized early on that these kind of more simple approaches of let's fix a problem where there's a gap or where there's a challenge, let's devise an innovative solution, was not getting to the root causes of why all of these things existed in the first place. And I'm sure many of you have found that in many of your worlds. And so both through this kind of personal professional journey as a doctor, being totally overwhelmed and recognizing most of these problems were systemic, no matter how well I tried to improve my practice or the hospital practice, and also in the field of social innovation, no matter how smart we got about solutions, that actually the work was much deeper. And then coming into the academic space of then actually trying to write about this work and recognizing it's about the process of change. So for me, systems change is not an outcome. It's about the process, right? And it's about the work that eventually, I got inspired by and read about and learned from many of the actually organizations on this call. I see Jordan on this call, Kasselhoff from Vision Spring and the work they've done around building coalitions and I-Alliance and others, to try and break down and recognize that this kind of linear model of trying to create change and think about outcomes and even the word impact is somehow holding us back from this deeper radical change that actually motivates most social entrepreneurs. And so I think I'm going to end here, but what I've kind of superficially, or quite simply recognized there are a couple of different camps when people talk about systems change. One is the complexity, that this is all, complex social problems. We need to think about it with a complexity mindset. Other people think about it with a scale mindset. Let's throw $100 million at the problem, and if we change the way everyone does it, then that's a systems change, including policies, etc. And the third way is really about power, which many activists, if you speak to most activists, they'll say those first two are not really changing systems, that it's really about who gets to decide and who has the power to actually change the decisions and who participates in those processes. So I think we need to be, keep a very rich, wide framing of what we mean by systems change, because I think all of these approaches are necessary, but I know that it is about getting one level deeper in our conversations about scale, about impact, and knowing that systems change is happening all the time, but also happens every couple of decades. And obviously we're going to talk a bit about the moment we're in right now. So I'll end there. Not sure if that's what you wanted, but
yeah, no, that's helpful. So it is a personal journey of actually failing, right? I think I can solve the problem as a doctor. Yeah, most of us, that's how we got there. Right? Fabulous. Thanks so much, Francois, for that. Thank you. Odin, can we hear from you? So you came from McKinsey, so I think you were born thinking in systems, but do tell us about your journey.
Yeah, I wish. No. So in fact, we still work with McKinsey advisors a lot in the Ashoka Globalizer program that you already mentioned. And the first thing that we do is, as an onboarding method, to tell them that they need to forget everything that they learned in their MBA studies, because that gets us nowhere. So not only was I not born like that, I might even have, I might have had to overcome additional hurdles because I was trained in another way of thinking, which you need to unlearn actually to some extent. I think I got to systems change thinking out of frustration too. I think this is going to be a common theme. I had just structured a thought process that we use in several Ashoka programs for strategy purposes. And that process was focused on helping social entrepreneurs figure out how they could replicate a new idea, some sort of social innovation more elegantly, like not doing everything yourself, but working in networks or open sourcing an idea so that others can adopt it, these kinds of things. And once that was done, I was looking at this thing and was like, well, so even if we are successful with this exercise, it doesn't actually mean much. It's not what we select social entrepreneurs for into the Ashoka Fellowship. Because what we do there, or what we have been doing for 40 years, is to ask, did the person develop something that has the potential to change a system, a root cause of a social problem? And it might not happen, but there must be potential for this to happen. And the whole process that I designed wasn't really focusing on that. And so I was like, okay, let's throw away all of that. We have to start again. And then I started reading, all the forefathers of systems thinking, basically, the giants on whose shoulders we start to stand slowly, I hope. The Donella Meadows of this world, Ludwig von Bertalanffy, all the great minds who invented systems think, or the more formalized way of thinking in systems for us. In a former life, I used to be a programmer, so I also got into systems modeling and simulations to some extent. And then once I had some feel for these new techniques and ways of thinking, I was like, okay, this is all well and nice, but we have to simplify all of that. It's just not feasible within a 14-week Ashoka program, for example, to develop systems dynamics mappings and computer simulations and that kind of stuff. So we should use the general concepts of systems dynamics and thinking, but we have to do it in a way that is approachable and way easier to communicate than some of these academics have approached it. And that's what I've been doing ever since. We've been playing around with tools and simpler ways of using them with practitioners. And that's what we're integrating in strategy processes, onboarding calls, in our selection process, etc. And at this point, I should probably say sorry to Karen, because I mean, you were going through this process when it was really not refined at all. So we were using you as a guinea pig. And the only excuse I have for that is that it probably helped the fellows after you to have a better experience. So this is just the iteration that we are going through still. And now we are thinking like new themes come up, more advanced topics come up. And I think for us at Ashoka, these are now things like new leadership. How do we have to redefine personal growth and values and leadership when we work on the systems level? And also, as Francois already mentioned, the issue of power. How can we leverage social entrepreneurship in a way that really affects the power dynamics that ultimately keep inequities in place in this world?
Thank you, Odin. That was really great. And for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to do any reading, Odin produces the most incredible reports as part of the Ashoka team, and so many of the tools are really useful for those of us in the field in terms of refining our thinking. So I'd encourage everybody to take a look at that. Seema, let's hear your journey, how you came to this.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here, and so much, Francois, of what you and Odin have already shared resonates so deeply with my journey or experience and some of the key insights along the way. And I think, I'll agree around we kind of get to this place around thinking systemically, figuring out how do we work within complex systems by shifting how we show up within them, both on a very personal level or the organizations we represent. I think it comes from like a real realization of how challenging it is to try to solve these kind of problems with the same old models we've been using. And I came at my work, which is about 20 years in global development, really trying to push the needle on how global development industry, particularly donors and practitioners and implementing partners, are working and where there's space for innovation. And I started that journey with a real kind of innovation mindset. If we can just find the wonderful social entrepreneurs, you know, the cutting edge innovators out there in the system that are operating, you know, in agile ways to disrupt the way the system patterns are, to disrupt the business models, disrupt the technologies, then we will have made a smart investment. And so I spent many years working on how to help USAID in particular, but also we had partnerships with lots of other donors and private sector actors to build a whole set of portfolio of programs to invest in innovation, invest in social entrepreneurs, finding ways to collaborate with this particular stakeholder group that was not on the forefront of partnerships within global development. And you know, while I think all those programs created great investments, probably provided seed capital and some support to social enterprises operating on different issues and challenges in different contexts and systems, I had this deep frustration that we were not scaling that, not just up, but also deep. And I think it gets to Francois's point of power, that we weren't really rejiggering or rethinking the way the system's dynamics are working in terms of how power is distributed between market actors, public sector actors, donor actors, and social enterprises. And that all of that was leading us to make, you know, small incremental investments in change, but we weren't really powering the deep structural change in the patterns of the system, in the way actors are interacting, and in the power between relationships. And so I came at systems with also, I think, a deep hunger, like Odin, started reading all the greats, started really trying to understand how donors design their programs, how they develop strategies, how they mobilize change within their funding, you know, as a funder, an institution, to think about how the investments are holistic, integrated, you know, really leveraging the different types of stakeholders and coalitions that are needed for meaningful systems change, and finding our processes wanting, very much designed on linear project management, risk management, reporting cycles, structured timeframes that have nothing really to do with really the dynamic and the human complexities of the systems in which we were investing these dollars. And so it was really two places that, you know, that came together. Is innovation needs a new model. You know, we've talked about agile innovation and adaptive innovation, but what does systems innovation really look like? How does that mean we have to work differently and innovate the way our organizations show up? And can we frame a new model of innovation that is around structural changes and at a societal level, you know, beyond technologies and business models? And then the other was this rubber band effect that you saw in development, where you invested lots of dollars in strengthening government systems and building, you know, market systems and market linkages and investing in new technologies, building capacity, but the project is done and the systems haven't rubber band back into, you know, original patterns because you haven't addressed any of the deep root causes and structural dynamics. And so with the two of those is really what's brought me to, you know, the work at GKI, just, you know, leading an organization that lives within the practitioner community, helping entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, NGOs. We even work with government and private sector to think about how are they showing up in systems? How are they designing their strategies for systems change? How are they building coalitions and networks to be able to, you know, access more solutions by working collectively, and really building a new model around evaluation. And that gets to, you know, what are we really measuring when we talk about social impact? What is it that we value change to be? And I posit that in the new area that I'm really excited about, the field and where it could go, is, you know, change in systems is dynamic. It's always happening around us, whether we create it or not. And so what does it look like if we start to think about building the adaptive capacity in every person, in every institution, in every sector to sense and adapt in smart ways to the system, to create that sort of equity and resilience in it, because we know systems are going to change. And how I think the whole field around social enterprise is not just how do we disrupt, but how do we build that resilience capacity in communities and in sectors to be able to respond to the next crisis, the next urgency, the next dynamic that's coming its way.
So let's maybe take that opportunity talking about crisis. I have 3 questions to ask our panelists and the broader group. We're actually going to break into breakout sessions shortly to discuss in smaller groups. So I'm going to start by asking, because I know, Francois, we lose you in a half an hour. So I'm going to pick the question I had directed more to you. I know you've been, everyone here has been doing a lot on the COVID, but I thought it would be interesting to hear from you. And then I've got 2 more questions. I'm gonna ask Odin and Seema, and then we're gonna break out into groups to discuss these questions and then come back as a group for bigger insights. Again, with the goal of pulling everybody's thoughts on this and popping it into a paper that we will be part of this policy paper. So the question is around COVID, and I know you've been doing a lot with the rapid response at the World Economic Forum. The group focused on supporting the work of social entrepreneurs in this rapid response. What are you seeing are going to be the biggest opportunities? I know Matthew Bishop was interviewing Don Gips on the last sessions that we had, and there was a lot of talk about how exciting so many of the decisions that would normally take forever are happening really quickly. What do you think? How can we use this moment to move this agenda forward? And what are you seeing as the biggest opportunities for us here?
Thanks so much. And I do think, looking forward to some of the discussions, because there are so many better ideas in this group than just coming from us, but happy to give some quick insights. I think we've all taken a bit of a stock of where we're at. I think we are seeing, collaborations emerge that just were not possible and that people are very open to. And we're seeing narrow windows for government interventions at the same time. But what we still lack in this sector is power, right? So we spoke about power. And so, this is a moment to think about the collective power of social entrepreneurs. So that's kind of one of the reasons I'm excited about Catalyst 2030. I think I'll start with a couple of different audiences. I think the one opportunity right now is in philanthropy. I think there has been a commitment and an understanding and a realization that we need to support organizations, not only on their, what are they going to deliver and how many, in terms of outputs and impacts, that actually philanthropy is starting to think differently about how they support organizations, at least now, to be responsive. And there has been a commitment by philanthropic organizations to do that. And I think it's also on the part of social entrepreneurs to advocate for that kind of work, that because there needs to be different ways of working, this is an opportunity to kind of make the arguments that I think in the world of those thinking about working more systemically needed to be made, or were trying to be made anyway. So there is that one opportunity, I think, in philanthropy. The other kind of in government policy, again, there are moments that are open right now. And I think this is, in some countries, the lobbies and advocacy for nonprofits and for social purpose organizations is quite sophisticated. In others, less so. I think there's a lot for us to learn between different countries and between groups that are doing that kind of advocacy and having a voice in some of those discussions. And then, in addition to kind of that individual work, I do think there's this collective work about saying, and this is more, I think, the kind of post-COVID recovery that people are already starting to talk about, the Build Back Better narrative, the Great Reset, whatever kind of people are using as that narrative, that this is the time to say, okay, well, the models of social entrepreneurs have been developing for the last couple of decades are actually what people are asking for, calling for, recognizing we need and we want. But we've always been trying to demonstrate one model at a time, and we need to say something collective about the sector, about these approaches and what's underpinning them in terms of values, what's underpinning them in terms of the way they treat employees, what's underpinning them in terms of the way they engage communities, the way they empower and create agency, all of these things which are quite different to, I think, the traditional models of the 20th century ways of thinking about development and social change. So there is, I think, a collective moment. And then I think, we're talking about the opportunity, but there are also some massive risks. And I think all of you are seeing that as well in terms of, the risks to democracy, the risk to participation, the centralizing of power. So I think many people recognize that, but even more reason to kind of be vigilant, be vocal, and form some of the, and work together in alliances and coalitions at times like these. I'll pause there.
Thanks, Francois. I would love to bring my friend Nick Stanhope into the conversation, who's been doing a lot of response on COVID here in the UK. And I've had the joy of working with Nick, who's at Shift Design before. So Nick, share with us a little bit what you see going on and what are some of the opportunities. And I know you've been sharing a little bit of the same thoughts in terms of incredible collaboration, money getting out the door faster than you're used to. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Karen. Really exciting, inspiring to hear everyone's thoughts, and so much of what was said really resonated strongly. I guess, so what this has accelerated and highlighted, which Seema used some really lovely language around, was the lack of adaptive capacity. That, if the sign of a good system is to be able to very quickly learn and adapt and get the right resources to the right place and reshape and reform that system in relation to the crisis, like our inability to do that has been revealed, entirely. But it was always there. I mean, we've always failed to learn and adapt. And I guess I'm talking particularly about the UK and the US, where most of our work is. To give an example of that, part of our work is with families living in temporary accommodation. So essentially, because of some bonkers changes to legal aid in the UK, the numbers of families in temporary accommodation spiked massively, went up about 85%. Up to around 100,000 families, 180,000 children living in temporary accommodation. That required a very rapid process of learning about what the different needs and circumstances of those families were, rapidly redesigning those services, getting the right support in place. The system entirely failed to do that for years and years and years and years. So we've seen that kind of example of a kind of major change in circumstances to a part of the system kind of, everywhere. Last week we were working with Mind, who are a service providing, who kind of, a couple of months ago were providing face-to-face support for about 500,000 people with mental illnesses. They had to close down 121 local centres, immediately adapt those services to be able to provide them remotely and safely. So I think that what does collective readiness look like? It doesn't look like so many of the behaviors we had previously. And again, what Seema said really resonated strongly. How do we sense and adapt in smart ways? I think some things that have been very clear is that the way that most of funders and commissioners and most kind of large civil society organizations have approached this has been through that same lens of kind of mainly independent actors trying to get a glimpse of the system, glimpse of a problem, and design their strategies and solutions in relation to that. And that's entirely redundant, really. How do we build up more collective intelligence and shared understanding of the system and how different audiences are affected, what's currently available, where the gaps and challenges are, how we kind of fill those gaps and play we use the word role a lot, really. How do we play the best role with and alongside others in a much more interdependent system? And so what gives me hope that is possible coming out of that? As I said, it's highlighted and accelerated all of those challenges. I think the hardest bits of proper change is the kind of values and principles which we've held so dear for so long, which is very kind of independently minded and very individualistic. This is my response, this is my solution, this is my strategy, this kind of hero's journey of the social entrepreneur. And perhaps through that lens, systems change has often been putting my solution at the center of a map, which connects to lots of bits of the system. I am delivering systems change on this hero's journey. That's the hardest bit, I feel like, to change, which is how do we, you know, as Francois said, it's a process, it's a set of relationships. It requires humility in the face of these massive systemic challenges. So that feels the hardest bit. I guess I've got much more hope about what's happening within some you know, shared learning, some much better kind of shared views of systems. I feel more confident about the way that funders are bringing much more collaborative behaviors and habits. People have talked about that. I feel more confident about perhaps some of the kind of forced humility of not being prepared to respond to the crisis. And then I guess just the final thing to say is that it feels like, you know, if other people have said this more articulately than I will, but this is potentially a warm-up, as terrible as it's been, for a whole series of kind of probably much more significant crises. We may soon be in an era of, well, we are already across the world, of kind of these cycles of environmental crises. So building that adaptive capacity very quickly feels like a real urgent question. And this has already been very inspiring discussion so far, and some of the practical ways of kind of progressing on that.
Thanks so much, Nick. Thank you for adding that. I thought maybe we'll come to the second question that I'd love to direct at Seema. And then we're going to have a third question, and then we'll break out into breakout groups, and everybody can pick which one their little group can decide which question they'd like to dig into more as a group. So Seema, what are we missing? And I know we talked about the collaborative, how can we be more collaborative in this time, which you touched on a little bit already. And I know that collaboration is an element of what needs to happen and how can we work better together. But there's also the sort of niggly question as social entrepreneurs of how do we access more of the big money? So I am all about getting access to the big money, because I think it's sort of, we're all fighting over scraps, little tiny scraps, the social entrepreneurs we're in, and the actual money is out in some other universe that most of us, you know, a lot of people, a lot of organizations that are part of the social entrepreneurship community don't have the infrastructure required even for entry into the, you know, to be hoping to get that. So how can we break into that, do you think?
So I knew you'd go there, Karen.
I know, she didn't want me to, but it did anyway.
I knew you'd go there. And I actually think that it's a big, you know, opportunity to be able to do translation between different sectors that talk about resources, that deploy resources with very different processes. And I think, you know, whether it's philanthropy, private sector, and corporates that are more and more looking for ways to invest in social innovation and social entrepreneurs, and donors, of course, I think create sometimes the most complexity, and that there's value for translating process so that we can collaborate in new ways. I mean, I think one of the things we feel very passionate about in terms of when we're engaging with partners that are trying to figure out how do I design my strategies for systems change, is to get practical enough to talk about resource mobilization and action planning. But we often start with the zooming out. And I think that's what the benefit of some of these mapping processes and these strategy processes that are, I think Odin's already shared some of his from Ashoka. I think the value of systemic strategy setting is that you can zoom out, and all of a sudden your lane grows. Like where you see yourself in the system becomes exponential, and you get, I think, away from this hero's journey. And Nick, what you said resonates so much with me. You know, we all feel that way, whether it's a social entrepreneur or you're a donor funder or a government leader. Like you're in the middle of that system because it's natural. We're human and we're trying to understand our role in the world, but it misses the opportunity to zoom out and see how you might grow the sense of resources and capacities and solutions to solve the problem, because now all of a sudden your container is larger, there are more stakeholders in it, and if you're working across those sectors, you can create a more holistic strategy for systems change where everyone is engaging in the leverage points, you know, that they're most well placed to solve for, right? And so we do this process. We did it with Polaris, which was really interesting, which is a really great US-based NGO that works on human trafficking. And we had them go through these systems processes, and they zoomed out, and all of a sudden they realized the potentiality of working with all kinds of new partners and resource partners, implementing partners that they didn't have in their strategy before, because that's not what they do. But they realized to achieve the mission, engaging local law enforcement, engaging district and city governments in new ways would allow them to achieve their results faster, better, and expand with like an abundant mindset the resources that they had available to solve at that higher level. I think that kind of thinking is really critical. Like it's really expanding out, and social entrepreneurs thinking about what are the different pathways to scale that I'm really trying to achieve, whether it's public sector pathways that's going to allow the deep change, the meaningful scale change, or it's private sector pathways or combinations. Where are those pathways? And then really building your resourcing strategy around that. What I find after working on both sides of this, kind of being a translator between social enterprises and large scale development project design, which is where I've spent most of my life, there's a deep need on both, a deep want, I think, on both sides of that, the funder side and the social enterprise, to figure out the potential for connectivity, for collaboration across it. I have seen DFID, DFAT, USAID all launch innovation shops, innovation leaders, innovative financing initiatives, languaging around agile, adaptive learning, program design, locally driven, local context program design. These are all language that's being used in donor communities that is signaling their deep desire to find more collective action approaches to problem solving, and that they want to get out of the traditional relationships with donor to government alone, recognizing that private, social enterprise, civil society all have roles to play, and that more innovative models for collaboration and financing are needed. I think there is some, there's real value to getting outside of the innovation funding mechanisms in any community, whether it's government or, donor communities, philanthropy communities, because that's not where the systems change work happens. It happens in the complex $180 million, what feels like an incredible amount of resources, program designs that are really about, shifting institutions, building institutional capacity, redefining market systems. Those larger complex programs are harder to get into because it does require finding new coalition partners that are part of more traditional development practitioners and partners to coach and mentor how to get integrated into these larger strategies. But I think that's where the opportunity really is really unleashing the social enterprise community to work with government and donor funders in ways that are integrated into their more holistic strategies of policy change and systems change, and figuring out where that niche role is, because they're looking for those disruptors. And I think that's where, and they're looking for the evidence of these models so that they can be scaled up, so that they can make the argument that there's a cost benefit to doing this approach or solving this problem with this kind of unique business model or social enterprise solution rather than business as usual. And I think that translation is needed. And I think the best way to do it is to create those safe spaces where funders and entrepreneurs can come together with government partners and corporate partners to talk about what is that larger collective action we want to achieve in the system, and where's everyone's roles and what's not working, and what are these deep power structures that are not helping us drive change. And that space, I think, needs to be heavily facilitated. We're working on it in some places, but we need an incredible investment in the capacity of people to collaborate across these boundaries and silos, and can be translators and facilitators to help make those kind of things happen.
Yeah, that's really well said. I think that's definitely, and I love the mapping. We talked about this before. I think that for Catalyst 2030, that I think it sounds like would be a wonderful exercise in and of itself. Just doing that real strategy, bigger strategy mapping. Thank you so much. Odin, I'd love to ask you, so Odin's studied systems change and done so much amazing work at Ashoka in terms of developing tools and creating the frameworks that we're all using. I'm sure there are things that seem like easy wins that we're not doing. What would those be? What do you think we're really missing? What opportunities have been there forever that we're just not capitalizing on? Because I'm sure there's a learning, which I'd also like to hear, sort of understand a little bit as a community. What has our learning in the systems change been? What do you think the biggest pieces are? Because we learn usually out of failure, right? So we've all been working, you've watched lots of social entrepreneurs attempt systems change and be more systemic. So first of all, what are the easy wins that we're missing, and you're sort of scratching your head wondering why we're not sort of getting better at it?
Yeah, if only there were easy wins here. I'm afraid I can't give too many examples here, especially because we are also just learning. I'm pretty sure that when we look back, for example, at Ashoka, but as a sector in general, in 10 years, we'll be saying, wow, cute, that's actually what we did. Oh, wow. And the thing is, I mean, from Ashoka's perspective, what little wisdom we might have in this space does not come from the originality of Ashoka employees, right? We are just watching fellows and writing things down. So I can only present what fellows have already explored for us. So with that said, I think there are two things that we might look into. One low-hanging fruit, or relatively low-hanging fruit, is I think we can get more people excited about systems work. And I think we can do that by highlighting two core messages. One is that providing direct services, helping people directly who are in need, and doing systems work is not an either or. You can do both, and there are elegant ways of combining the two approaches and to create more synergies. Simple things to get started with this are to ask yourself, how can I be an example to policymakers, or how can I share a best practice in my field maybe, or can I give input to a new industry standard? Like usually you can find simple ways to start having some effect on a systems level. And those techniques are accessible or relevant for many social entrepreneurs, not just the ones who are aiming for very big scale systems change. And that would just increase the number of people that we have available to us. Another one is that systems changes don't have to be big. This comes back to how you want to define it. In my eyes, in order for something to be systemic, it doesn't have to be big. Like a typical goal that an Ashoka fellow might identify in the globalizer process is, like in the water management system in Mexico, the administration talks to local communities before making decisions. Now that might sound like a teeny tiny little, like that's not even worth calling a systems change. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it doesn't challenge capitalism, but it provides more agency and power to local communities in this one little system, the water management system. And that is relevant in its own right. It is systemic, but it also paves the way towards deeper changes that we ultimately want. We can maybe compare this to the women's rights movement. So here we see, like in one town, people might decide that women should have the opportunity to vote. And then they do that, and then they see, oh wow, the world still stands. Like it wasn't a total catastrophe. And then that attacks the belief that women shouldn't have full citizen rights. And then based on that slightly shaken belief, the next targeted systems change becomes easier. And that shakes the deeper mindset again. And so we have this spiral that gets us to deeper and deeper changes. And this back and forth between the small changes and the deep mindset changes that we need, this is something that we can all contribute to. So as we are working on a systems level, we are not failing just because we are not attacking racism. You know, we can chip away at it, small changes at a time, or we can go for the big picture directly, but that's not the only mode. That's all I want to say. And I think with these two messages, you know, you can do both direct service and system change work, and small systems contributions also count. We can mobilize more people for this game. Another low-hanging fruit is that probably just by being aware of the issue, we could enhance accountability and legitimacy in our systems work. And that is something that I think so far hasn't really been discussed so much, but it's important. Like publications like Winners Take All or Just Giving and No Such Thing as a Free Gift, and all these publications point out a number of really relevant justice-based issues around accountability, equity, etc. Like don't privatize what should be public, engage perpetrators and not just the victims of social problems, create accountability by involving the people who are affected by a problem, don't change the things that matter, which in most cases means power dynamics, etc., etc. And what we just did is we published a report called Systemic and Empowering, where we looked at how can social entrepreneurs bring change on a systems level while accommodating these criticisms, while creating the legitimacy, the accountability that we need for this type of work. And we found some incredible examples that I think are worth studying, and there are probably way more out there, but this is the type of thing that we should be doing.
I'm gonna pop that paper in the chat because it's incredible. Those case studies are really worth looking at, and on the principles as well, Odin, like you said, of what the criticisms of us generally are. So I'll pop it in right now.
Thanks. And maybe just to mention one example, Flaviano Bianchini from Source, an Italian Ashoka fellow, he empowers communities to collect evidence, which they can then use to fight mining companies against human rights violations. And they have achieved a number of policy changes. They have achieved like compensations in millions of dollars, the delisting of big companies from multi-billion investment funds, like really systemic stuff. And this organization is tiny, like they have like 3 people, and it's just incredible. But they do it by allowing more people to be change makers, by really like involving the people to take action and to claim the power that they should have. And this is a core principle that we identified here, and that I think has the power to allow us to have deeper changes overall. And then just as a final publication in 2 minutes, for all the things that were just mentioned, right? The hero's journey, how to create networks, the personal development side of it. We just launched an Ashoka System Change podcast where we talk about exactly those things with incredible social entrepreneurs from around the world. Including in the first episode, Jordan Casselow, who is attending, and our very own Jeru Billy Moria, who was the initial host of Catalyst and is also attending. So if you want to explore those issues a bit more, and like including the personal touch that each of those incredible change makers bring, then this might be an easy way to do it. You don't even have to read anything. You can just listen while you're doing laundry.
Wonderful, thank you. I know, Francois, we're losing you in a second. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to continue the conversation. Any last thoughts before you have to jump off?
No, I think I should give you the time. Part of someone asked about system leadership is knowing when to get out the way.
Well, thank you for joining us. I wanted to bring into that conversation the last comment that you made, Odin, which is interesting. And actually, Francois, you talked about it a little bit on one of the articles that you wrote for the WEF about the similarities and what we can learn from the more activist community. And I'd love to bring in my friend Tristram Stewart, who's on with us, who's the amazing founder and CEO of Feedback, and also Toast Ale, just to talk about what you see in terms of system change, Tristram, from your perspective, having worked on this. And it was interesting when I first met Tristram, and we were talking about being Ashoka Fellows, and Tristram said, I never thought of myself as a social entrepreneur, I'm an activist. And it's been interesting to look at colleagues who have been better at attacking things systemically right from the beginning, who actually identify more as activists. So I'd love for Tristram, if you can, speak a little bit about that.
Thanks, Karen. Well, to summarize, it's a big here to everything that I've heard, in particular Nick's words about the hero's journey and needing humility, and all of our great achievements, our recognizable and wonderful achievements as social entrepreneurs do need to be put in perspective. And that perspective from my point of view is if arresting the ecological crisis globally is our objective, we've achieved more or less nothing. carbon dioxide emissions continue to go up even during a COVID crisis. Of course, it's accelerating less, but it's still contributing to global warming. And that, I think, should give anyone with the ecological system and its need for change a very, very high, big reason to be humble. In terms of my own hero's journey, I do want to make a little correction to the introduction. I'm not the CEO of Feedback. I'm the founder of Feedback.
That's right.
Never took the CEO. I never took the CEO position.
Now we can do a whole podcast on Tristram and his crazy, fantastic power structure, refusal to take power. But okay.
Well, exactly. But I think that is a small part of what we're looking at here. We all want to see system change. Our own systems are in need of change within the NGO community, and one of those is this. You mentioned it yourself, Karen. We fight over scraps, and that system is one that models and reflects the very system that we're trying to change. I'm much more interested now than I ever have been, and I've always been into collaboration and alliances, but we need to start becoming much more like mycelium under the ground, universally connecting to all forms of life, both human and not human, and unleashing that connectivity. And through that kind of connectivity, I think we can have a focus on a different kind of bank account. Yes, of course, Karen, big money is super useful. For doing programs on the ground, it's indispensable. Can we do system change without big money? Yes, we can. And I believe that the big bank account that is on our side, if what we're looking for is social justice and an end to the environmental catastrophe, is the bank account that every human being has in them, this desire to be connected with each other, and I believe also connected to the natural world. And if we can unlock that bank account through culture change, through appealing to people's better nature, I think as an activist, I would say we can change the world without a budget. We can put the arguments out there in such compelling ways, bring them to life, make the experience immersive, that all the individual businesses and on the ground solutions will grow from that fertile soil. And I speak also, as you say, as a founder of Toast Ale, it's a business. It's pinpointed one particular problem, the waste of bread on a universal scale. It does what traditionally brewers used to do with that stuff. It turns it into beer. And then it also challenges the question of what should we be doing with profits from business? And we direct all of our profits into charities like Feedback that challenge the food system and strive to make it better. So social entrepreneurship, pinpointing individual problems, coming up with great solutions that work, that is the work of a social entrepreneur. I think that work can, as has already been said, be coupled with a call for a much deeper kind of change. You are demonstrating that the system needs changing and how it can be done. You're not claiming that you have the whole solution. You are a messenger of a different way in which things can be done. And I think that not only doing it out there in the world and changing that system, that change of our own individual systems, both our ego and its role in how we go about change, but also how our organizations project their brand or ego, if you like. I think those are absolutely integral parts of how the social entrepreneur and the activist need to be one and the same thing.
Beautifully said, Tristram. Thank you. That was so bang on. And for the record, I agree that we can do systems change, and we will do systems change without big money, but I see no reason why we shouldn't have access to the big money too, for the record. Because why should we get none? But we can do those, we can work on those issues simultaneously, but it's absolutely not a barrier. I couldn't agree more. So we're going to break out into, we're going to get into groups of 8. Anton, can you just break us into groups of 8? And then if you can choose which of those 3 questions as a group that you would like to discuss, and then let's come back and share. It'd be great to get the voices of all the other people. We've got so many amazing people on here that I see who, Olga, I'm making you share your thoughts. I don't care what group you're in, because I want to draw out some. Olga's is at Ashoka and doing amazing work in terms of working with government as a path to scale, and has done such incredible work that I want to tap into in a little bit. So thanks for joining, Olga. But if you can break us into groups of 8, that'd be 4 groups of 8, and then pick which of those 3 questions you would like to discuss as a group, and then let's come back and share. So what are we already doing in the sector that we could be doing more of? What are we missing? How can we collaborate better? And what are the biggest opportunities in a post-COVID world? So I'll let you guys pick which ones you would like to address, and then let's come back and discuss. We're going to be breaking out for 15 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes to share when we come back.
I open the rooms now. Please accept.
Okay.
Hi, Santiago. I see that you're the only one who are not in the breakout room. You just need to accept the invitation I sent for the breakout session. If you need help, just write me in the chat. Hello, Rolf. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Because we are already in the breakout sessions, so I would put you in another breakout session if you want.
Okay.
Because I think you have, but I sent you the invitation already. Can you accept the invitation I sent you? Because I see that you are in breakout room 3 normally.
Oh, there is nowhere I can click on anything.
I try again. Wait for it. Now?
No, where should I see it?
Normally on the screen. Then you can you have to put join, because you should have gotten an invitation.
No.
Wait, I try again. Can you check the whole Zoom?
Oh, now I see it. Sorry.
Okay, perfect. Then yeah. Hi, Karen. I see you have already finished your session. Should I bring everyone back from the breakout rooms?
Yes, definitely, urgently. I didn't know how to get back out, so
Okay.
should have. Let's do
Yeah,
quick.
I will break.
Try and end on time for everybody.
They will get a 60-second notice, so they will be joining soon.
All right, and they'll be yanked out if they don't.
Twenty seconds.
Great.
So, Seema, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I don't know what's wrong with my speaker. I'm trying different things here. On the question you were asking, I've seen a lot of wanting to deal with the power system, but then, you know, it's this challenge of dealing with the power system that exists while you're trying to change it.
While you're trying to change it.
You know, and the easiest way to look at it is when I look at campaign finance, like say you're trying to change campaign finance, but you have to take money because you're in the system you're in. You might not agree with it, but you're taking money to win that election because that's the system you're having to, you know, you have to work within. But then you're trying to change it at the same time, and it's such a chicken and egg. I think that's another barrier that we can figure out how to disrupt.
Carol, you should definitely get a hold of the collaboration group.
I will.
Okay,
Thank you. That's
I'm being
great.
told. So I'm sorry we went a little over on the sessions. I didn't actually know how to get out of it. So I will let. I'm being told by Odin that Tristram needs to share a great quote. So I'm going to let Tristram do that. Tristram, please share the great quote.
Okay, so I just was mid-flow and somehow got disconnected. So I'm slightly out of the loop as to what just happened. I lost my friends in my breakout group, and now I'm with you again, Karen, which is delightful, obviously.
It was time to end, so we yanked you out.
Oh, okay. That was,
Sorry.
without ceremony.
Yeah.
But you want the quote anyway, do you?
Yes, we want the quote. Please share.
Oh, okay. So actually it was Odin who made the point, and I said, well, I carry Slavoj Žižek's words on this matter in my pocket all the time. He says, to demand consistency at strategically selected points where the system cannot afford to be consistent is to put pressure on the entire system. So I should just say, this came out of a discussion of, okay, so as a social entrepreneur, is it okay just to be solving one little thing? Yes, and it's even better if you've selected that one thing because it strategically presents the ultimate challenge to the whole system. So Zizek says, oh gosh, I've lost it now. Here we are. To demand consistency at strategically selected points where the system cannot afford to be consistent is to put pressure on the entire system. The art of politics lies in making particular demands which, while thoroughly realistic, strike at the core of hegemonic ideology and imply a much more radical change. A political movement begins with an idea, something to strive for. Once people get deeply engaged in it, they become aware that much more than meeting their initial demand would be needed to bring about true justice.
Beautiful. That's really beautiful. Does anybody else have anything to share that they want to share from the sessions? Because we're just wrapping up and we have very little time. That was really well said. Olga's work at Ashoka, like I said, Olga, it'd be great if you could share in the chat some of the resources on working with government. She's working on this amazing class to teach social entrepreneurs about how to effectively work with government, which is I believe, a very effective way of supporting systems change in the area that you're looking to work in. Olga, any last thoughts that you'd like to share listening in on all of this?
no, apart from the fact that working with government, as somebody shared before, becomes more and more relevant as we are looking up to government as being our key partner in solving societal problems. So we just hope that the content that we are creating, and again, it's not the wisdom that we just carry in our heads, but is extracted from the experience of social entrepreneurs, could help and guide those willing to engage with government to put together more consistent strategies of engaging with government. The course that we are putting together now is in its final weeks of developing. So through the Catalyst, we will be happy to share content and also the opportunity to join guided sessions to develop engagement with government strategies. You're on mute, Karen.
Yeah, for all of you social entrepreneurs, I can't recommend it enough. Incredible insights and lots of opportunities to not make mistakes that save you some time and understanding. So it's really well put together. Thanks for joining us today, Olga. Thank you to Seema and Odin and everyone for joining the session. It's been really interesting, and we'll look forward to crunching all of this information. If you have any further thoughts or insights that you'd like to include as part of this thinking, we'd love to hear from you so we can include it in the paper that we're going to be producing from this conversation. So please do send it to One Family Foundation, and we will we'll include it in the paper as well. We'll put that, we're sending a draft of the paper out for input as well, so you can help us formulate the thinking on this. We really appreciate your time, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Karen. Sure, you don't need any more time slots where you will regroup to discuss it. Have you already discussed it in the little?
We can send out an invitation to join for further conversations on it. To have all the emails of the people who attended. So we'll continue the conversation.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.